In many different writing situations that you encounter, whether that's an academic or professional or personal situation, you'll likely need to incorporate evidence or secondary research. This will often involve making a decision about whether you should summarize or paraphrase or quote that evidence. So in this lesson, we'll focus on quoting, specifically quoting in an academic context using MLA format. As you probably know, using evidence helps make your writing more credible, but when you incorporate quotes and other evidence into your writing, the idea is not just to provide information, but to also add to the conversation. You can do this by applying a quote to personal experience, agreeing with the quote, disagreeing, or pointing out its flaws, or adding your own thoughts to it. This is what it means to successfully integrate a quote. On the other hand, if you were to just throw a quote into your paper randomly without much explanation or introduction, or if, let's say, the grammar of the quote doesn't work with the grammar of your sentence, readers would quickly realize that you don't fully understand the quote. You aren't conversing with it. Properly framing quotes shows that you have control over your writing and that you understand the conversation that's taking place. So let's talk about effective ways to integrate quotes. We'll use this little acronym that I got from a colleague, IF or if you're quoting. The I stands for integrate the quote, while the F stands for framing it. When you integrate a quote, you effectively introduce it to your readers. Who or what source does it come from? You might use an attributive tag like Brandt claims, or you might get more detailed and integrate the quote with a longer sentence that you've already started. In this way, the quote doesn't stand alone as its own sentence. That would mean that you don't have control over it. So you always want to introduce a quote somehow and mesh it with your own writing. Just be sure that the grammar makes sense when you do that. So for instance, if your writing is in past tense, then you may need to use brackets to change the quote to past tense or something like that. So that's on the front end of quoting. On the back end, you need to frame the quote, again, with some of your own words. Here you should explain the meaning of the quote and or how it relates to what you're saying at that moment in your paper. Ultimately, the quote won't speak for itself. So it's your job to make connections for your readers. And then, of course, lastly, you should always cite anything you quote. As I said before, we're using MLA, and that goes for quotes and paraphrasing. And you want to do that with an in-text citation and a works cited entry. For MLA, your in-text citation typically includes the author's last name and page number, if the text includes page numbers. And then you'll want to be careful about how you punctuate your citations as well. Pay attention to the example in the next slide. What we're going to do now is look at an example of integrating and framing in action. So here is an original quote from Brandt. Literacy, like land, is a valued commodity in this economy, a key resource in gaining profit and edge. So that's Brandt, page 169. Now, let's say I've decided I want to use this quote in my literacy narrative. So the first thing I need to do is integrate it. I need to type my own thoughts, my own understanding of the quote, and its context as a lead-in to the actual quote itself. So in purple here, I have Deborah Brandt takes a socio-cultural approach to literacy and sees it not so much as an altruistic gift from parent to child as a tool for success. She instead claims that, and then I give the quote. So the part in purple is my way of leading up to the quote. It's more effective than just plopping down something like Brandt claims, although there'd be nothing wrong with doing that. But a more detailed sentence lets readers know how to interpret the quote before we even get to it, and it provides us with some context. Take note of the ellipsis that's highlighted too. I decided I didn't need to include the part in the quote about land, so I just included the ellipsis to show that the original quote includes more. And then you want to also notice how the quote still meshes into the sentence in a grammatically correct way. So even if you change a quote by using an ellipsis or perhaps you include words inside of brackets, you still have to make sure that the sentence is grammatically correct and reads as a complete sentence. And then we also have an in-text citation here. I already said Brandt's name in the sentence earlier. So in this case, all I need is the page number. So at this point, we have a good start to integrating the quote, but we're not done. We don't want to just leave the quote hanging there at the end of a paragraph, for example. So instead, I've added this sentence in red. Just like commodities in this economy, though, some brands have more value than others. And then the paragraph might continue to elaborate on that idea. So what I did was I added a new thought to Brandt's quote, and then from there I would go on to talk about how her point connects to my overall point, or whatever it is I'm trying to say in that part of the paper. I might also, explain how I'm using the quote to expand on something I've witnessed or something I've experienced personally, if this were in my literacy narrative. But ultimately, I would just be using the quote to extend the conversation.